Thanksgiving is coming up, which means we're going to be needing some really good dishes to feed all the people for your Thanksgiving. And today is actually part one of a Thanksgiving series that I will be doing to help you get prepared for Thanksgiving using 100% whole grains. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to not only make a pie crust using 100% freshly milled wheat, but I'm going to be sharing with you my amazing, wonderful sweet potato pie recipe that is actually very easy and will have everybody raving about you at Thanksgiving or whenever you want to serve it. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia and it's wonderful to have you here. And it's November, time to get ready for Thanksgiving. So this video, I'm going to be showing you all about how I make my pie crust. This is a basic pie crust recipe. And I have really had to do a lot of tweaking and trial by error to get this one right with 100% freshly milled wheat, because it's not that super easy. There's just so many pie crust recipes out there. This recipe is actually a Julia Child recipe that I have converted over to freshly milled wheat. Big challenge I have had with pie crust is them always falling apart, especially when rolling them out. I generally can roll this out without it falling apart, although sometimes it does still fall apart, and it kind of did a little bit in this video, and I show you how I recover from that. So no harm, no foul. You'll be able to see how I handle little oopsies in the kitchen. Now, before I show you how to make this, a few key factors to consider. One thing I have found is that it's key that everything is very, very cold. This includes your flour. And whenever you are using freshly milled wheat, usually we mill it and then immediately use it. You actually don't want to do that this time, because when you mill it, it's actually kind of warm. Your flour is warm from being milled. So what I do is I go ahead and mill my flour and then I stick it in the freezer because I want it very cold. And you can do this the day before, stick it in the freezer. Doing it that way will slow down the oxidation process, so you'll still be able to maintain as much nutrients as possible. Or you can stick it in the freezer for just a few hours. Bottom line, you need it cold, you don't need it warm, because if you do it warm, that melts all the fats and then you got kind of a mess on your hands. So that's a big thing there. Make sure your flour is completely cold. Another great thing about this is it actually uses not only butter, but you also need, the original recipe calls for shortening. Of course, I don't want to use Crisco shortening because it's just nothing but chemicals. So there are a few things that I've experimented with that worked really well. The first one, of course, is lard. Lard works extremely well to use. There is palm shortening, which is a non-GMO, more organic type shortening that I have yet to try because it's been very difficult for me to get my hands on. I've got it in my Azure order right now, hopefully coming soon, so I'll be able to use that as well. So if you've used palm shortening, let me know and let me know how it goes. But I have a feeling that's probably going to work well. I've also used coconut oil. Today I will actually be using coconut oil instead of shortening. So this is butter and coconut oil. Now, with coconut oil, you need to make sure that you are not using your extra virgin coconut oil. You just need regular coconut oil, because if you use the virgin coconut oil, you're going to have a coconut taste. So if you use just regular refined, just regular coconut oil, that will actually not give you a coconut taste to your pie crust. So that's the biggest tip. It's make sure everything is extremely cold when doing this, and I'll walk you through when I make the recipe, and that includes your flour, something we have to prepare a little bit when using freshly milled grains. So first I'm going to show you the pie crust recipe that I use, and then of course we have to make a pie with it. So I will be also sharing with you my sweet potato pie recipe, which is going to be perfect for Thanksgiving, but I serve this many times throughout the year because my family loves it. And the wonderful thing about sweet potato pies, you can serve it either hot or cold, either way. And let me know which one you prefer down in the comments below, hot or cold sweet potato pie. And if you actually don't like sweet potato pie, I do encourage you to try this out, because I was never really a fan of sweet potato pies until this recipe, because it's really good. And I can't remember where I got it. I've had it for a long time and I probably tweaked it a bit, but there you go. So without further ado, let's get on to our pie crust and then showing you our sweet potato pie recipe. All right, so here we are at Miss Betsy Bosch. This is my Bosch universal mixer. And again, all ingredients, recipes, the tools that I use, everything like that, I will be linking it down below. But if you do not have a Bosch universal mixer or some sort of mixer with a whisk type attachment, because this is how I've learned the easiest way to make things like pie crust and biscuits and how to incorporate in that butter or whatever fat that you're using. If you do not have this, you just need a good old-fashioned pastry cutter. If you don't have one of these, you can just use 2 butter knives. But bottom line, we just need to cut in our fats that we will be using, and we're actually going to be using 2 different types of fats with this one. So first of all, we need soft white wheat flour. We're going to be milling basically about 4 cups of soft white wheat berries. That will come out to about 5 1/4 to 5 1/2 cups of soft white wheat flour, which is what we're going to use. Do not use a hard wheat with this. You probably could use spelt or kamut. They act a lot like soft white wheat, but bottom line, we need 5 1/2 cups of flour. That's milling about 4 cups of wheat berries. And then you need to sift your flour. And I've had some people give me a little bit of a pushback about sifting because I guess they think I'm making white flour. I am not making white flour with just a good old-fashioned flour sifter. I just have a cheap one I got at a yard sale for 25 cents. But we just sifted our flour. That may take out about maybe like 10% of the bran and germ, but it also lightens it as well. So again, I measure out 5 1/4 to 5 1/2 cups of soft white wheat flour, and then I sift that. And so this is after sifting. So we're gonna add it all in to our mixer, or you're just gonna need a really big bowl to do this. One thing I forgot to mention is this is actually making 4 pie crust, which I highly recommend that if you're going to go ahead and go through the effort of making pie crust, make more than you need because they freeze very well. And then you already have pie crust made for if you need kind of a fast pie. So this is gonna be 4 pie crust. So to our flour, we're going to add 1 tablespoon of salt. I'm actually only adding about a teaspoon this time because the butter I'm using is salted. You do need to use unsalted butter, but if you only have salted, just back off the salt to about 1 teaspoon. Otherwise, 1 tablespoon of salt needed if you're using unsalted butter. I hope that makes sense. So we're just going to put the cover on real quick and just mix that up. And now we're going to add our fats. And the first one we're going to be adding is our butter. And you need 1 1/2 sticks of butter, or 6 ounces of butter. And you're going to cut them up into little cubes. And I just go ahead and add them all in. And then we're going to cut it in. And again, the Bosch really makes this so much easier. We're going to cut it all in until it looks very coarse, kind of like little pea crumbs. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you what it's like. All right, so I did that in like less than a minute on the 1 setting. So if you have a Bosch, I just turned it to 1, so not super fast. And as you can see, it has been incorporated, but it still has these little chunks of butter. I probably will do this a little bit more because I do want a bit smaller than that. But you can see just how much faster this is going compared to doing it by hand. All right, so we've got our butter incorporated, and now we're going to be adding in whatever other type of shortening, lard, coconut oil, whatever type of other fat that you are going to be using. And I do find that you need both because the shortening, lard, coconut oil gives it a flakiness to the crust. Now, since I have a Bosch, I'm going to go ahead and add, since these are in bigger chunks, I'm actually going to add a little bit at a time and go ahead and incorporate it a bit at a time until it's all incorporated in similar to the butter. And one thing I forgot to mention is make sure that your butter and your fats are all very cold. If you're using shortening, lard, things like that, you need to make sure that you need to keep them in the fridge. They have to just be very cold. Don't dump in just coconut oil, liquefied. Don't dump in a softened shortening or lard. It does just need to be very cold. Now, shortening and lard don't necessarily, so they may not solidify completely in the fridge, but they do just need to be very, very cold. Okay, so this actually took me a bit, it does take a bit longer to do this. And as you can see with these chunks, they're gonna be larger chunks. Now I found that lard tends to incorporate a bit better, but either way, they are going to be larger chunks that you're gonna be able to see. And so now if you have and a tip is if you are doing this by hand, cut up your butter and your shortening type fat that you're gonna be using into small chunks, and that's going to make it way easier for you. So you saw me dump in larger chunks. That's because I have a hardcore machine to do a lot of the heavy work. I actually had to put this all the way up on high on 4 to really get the shortening type fat to mix better. It just takes a lot because I had larger chunks. So if you wanted to do it on a lower setting or go a bit faster, cut it up into smaller bits. Just a tip. But this is how it looks now. And if you have a Bosch, we are now going to switch over to our dough hook because now it's time to start incorporating this into more of a dough. So we're going to put that on here. And now you need some ice water. I usually measure out a cup and then add ice to it because again, we need it very, very cold. And we're going to slowly start adding in water until it starts forming more into a dough. And this could change every day. It changes with the type of fat that you're using. If you use a different type of wheat, it could change. So that's why I can't give you an exact measurement, but I do just measure out a cup of ice water to be able to do this. So let's start. I'm going to add the guard here, and I'm going to slowly start mixing in the water. And I'm just going to put this on 1 on the low setting. All right, and when doing it this way, do give it a little bit of time for that water to get mixed in. Don't just add a little bit, wait, and oh, it's not, you know, and keep adding it. So just do it slowly because it was starting to form more. And basically what you're doing is you're wanting enough where it's going to form a dough like that. So this is obviously dough. And to be honest, I barely used any water. Again, it really just all depends whenever it comes to this. So yeah, I think I use maybe a tablespoon. So as you can see, I know that this is pretty good because again, you want it to just be able to form in your hand. Now, as you can see, I do have chunks of, I'm using coconut oil in this one. So I am using chunks of that, and that's normal to see. It will bake out. So let's go ahead and get this off, and then we're gonna clear this space, get a whole lot of flour, and we're gonna move this to the counter space. All right, so here we go, clean surface. Let's move our pie dough out. Okay, and if it's kind of not all sticking together, that's fine. We're then gonna just form it into one big dough. And as you can see, I didn't really need to put a lot of flour on my counter. So no need to do that because right now I'm not rolling it out flat. I don't really need much. I'm rolling it on a big lump. And I try to get it to where it looks fairly even like that. And then we're just gonna go ahead and divide it up into 4. So I'm gonna eyeball it, divide once in the middle, divide again, divide again. And sometimes I do just weigh these to kind of make sure that they're the same, but today I feel like just eyeballing it. And the thing with, again, with pie crust, we're kind of trying to work as fast as we can. Hold on, this looks a little, there we go. And then we just roll them up. And now it really just depends on what you're doing. If you only need one of these, feel free to freeze the other ones. And when I freeze pie crust, I generally just use quart freezer Ziploc bags, just right on here, pie crust, the date that I made it. And I generally just put it right in, seal it almost all the way, and then just kind of flatten it, because if you flatten it, it's just easier to store in your fridge. All right, and there we go with that. And then now this is ready. I can just throw that into my freezer. So I already have one that's ready to now show you, but you need your pie dough to be really, really cold when you're ready to roll it out. So you're either gonna, if you're gonna use it that day, you need to put it in your fridge for maybe about a good 2 hours, bottom line, just really cold, or you can put it in your freezer. If you're pulling it out from your freezer to use, just set it on the counter for probably about 20-25 minutes to be able to use it. So it's still gonna be cold, but it's gonna be thawed enough out where you can now use it. So we're gonna wrap these up, go ahead and get them in cold storage, and then let's bring out one to actually start rolling to make that sweet potato pie. So here we are in an extremely messy counter because we're ready to roll out our pie dough. So as you can see, we need to make sure that we have quite a bit of flour on here because it just sticks. And then you need a good rolling pin that's also covered in flour as well. So, and then also have some flour standing by because you may need to add it. So we just kind of get it around. And then here is my pie crust. I actually made this a few days ago. This one is made with lard. So as you can see, there's still chunks in it, and that's okay. And I pulled it out of the freezer, put it on the counter for about 25 minutes, and then recorded this video. So while that was doing, I actually just put it in the fridge. But it's still fairly cold. And now we're gonna start rolling it out. And this just takes patience, a lot of flour, and a lot of prayers because, and this is when my biggest struggle with pie crust is getting it where I can actually roll it out. So as you can see, we just keep doing this, and the key is just a lot of flour. I keep moving it around, kind of moving it around, and if it starts cracking or anything, you can just kind of put it back together. But the key is a lot of flour on your rolling pin, flour that's also on your counter. And you just, again, need to make sure this is very cold. And I found that it works best if it's come out frozen on the countertop for 25 minutes. And then it's good to go. Or you just have to leave it in your fridge for a long time. Okay, so I think that's probably maybe a little bit more where I want it to be. And again, just kind of be a bit gentle with it. If you start seeing where it sticks to your rolling pin, you just need to add a little bit more flour to your rolling pin. All right, and now we're going to carefully, this is where it's really tests if you add enough flour. We're actually going to carefully roll it up. Oh, and it is starting to fall apart, but I'm going to show you a little hack if it does start to fall apart. And the reason it's falling apart is, again, just not enough flour. And then we're going to get our pie crust, pie pan, and gently kind of roll it out. So as you can see, that kind of just fell apart, but that is okay because all you have to do is just, you can always just start working it in the pie pan. And the reason, I mean, all-purpose flour, this usually is so much easier with all-purpose flour. With the freshly milled, it's just a little bit trickier. And sometimes I do it where it comes out perfectly. I can roll it out here, no problem. And sometimes I don't. It actually is kind of hot in my house right now. So that means that this dough is really starting to get warm a lot faster. One thing that you can do is, and this is something I'm still on the lookout for, is get a marble slab. Marble actually stays colder. Marble actually maintains the chill very well. So it's not heating up your dough as much when you're working it. And I know that's a tip that Julia Child has always recommended, but I've had a hard time finding marble that's big enough for this. So if it starts cracking like that, it's no big deal. You can go in and fill it in. And for it being the bottom of the crust, no one's gonna know. As Julia Child says, when you're alone in the kitchen, who's to see? So I do have it where it's on the bottom, and then any type of crust that's hanging off, you can either just remove by hand, get you a knife to do it, and then now you can pretty much design it however you want. And do not come to me for mad pie shaping skills because I'm still working on them myself, but I generally just like to flute it a little bit. So just like that, we kind of just squeeze it together like that and like that. And again, this is quite forgiving. And if you find in some parts you just need dough, take some of your extra and you can just work that in. Again, you are perfectly able to shape this however you need it. Don't stress out about pie crust because ultimately, I mean, again, I'm not doing a double layered. So double layered, you do want to be a bit more pretty, but because you do have that top layer. But with something like this, you just want it to taste good and look pretty too. And it's going to look pretty. Again, no one's going to see the bottom of it, but they will see here. And I know many people are much better at doing this than I am. I'm still practicing myself. And now we have it. You can see we did have a bit of extra dough left over. Okay, just make sure it's as even as possible. And now we're just going to put it in the fridge, let it chill for a bit while we make our sweet potato pie filling. And we'll see you back here. All right, y'all, it is sweet potato pie time. This is a crazy easy sweet potato pie, especially if you already have mashed sweet potato and your pie crust already made. You can actually whip this up in no time. So naturally, first we need a large bowl. You can do it in a mixer, but this is for one pie, so I'm not going to bring out my massive Bosch universal mixer for this. We're just going to use a hand mixer. So first of all, you need 2 cups of sweet potatoes mashed. And I highly recommend to go ahead and use fresh sweet potatoes. Don't use the canned. You can if you want to, no pun intended. But all you have to do is with fresh sweet potatoes, go ahead and peel them, chop them up, throw them in to water, bring them up to a boil until they're softened, just like if you were to make mashed potatoes. That's exactly what you're doing. So you're just bringing it up to a boil, let it go until you can pierce a fork through them, and then you pull, and then you just strain them, and then mash them up. And I usually like doing this in pretty big batches, especially now since sweet potatoes are in season. I like to go ahead and, well, we're not growing them right now, but usually we would be harvesting them right now, or they're the best price in the stores. So you can go ahead and get you a bunch of sweet potatoes, go ahead and process a ton. And then I actually will freeze them in 2-cup mashed, 2-cup increments in the quart size baggies in my freezer. And that way I have mashed sweet potatoes for a while, already ready to go in my freezer. So whenever I want sweet potato pie, just go ahead and pull out the sweet potatoes to thaw, and also the pie crust to go ahead and get that going. And again, it makes it a lot faster. So here are 2 cups. As you can see, I didn't mash them. It's okay, because we're gonna mix them up anyway. So, but these are very soft. So these are 2 cups of sweet potatoes. And then now we just dump everything in. So we need a 1/3 cup of softened butter. It does need to be softened, otherwise you're going to have a hard time mixing it in. So a 1/3 cup of softened butter. You also need 2 large eggs at room temperature. So we're going to add these. And if you do not have room temperature eggs, you can use cold. It is going to cause your butter to kind of look a slightly more chunky, but I have done it before. It's no big deal because it will melt when you're baking it, so don't panic. But room temperature is preferred. And then we add 3/4 cups of evaporated milk. Now, if you double this to make 2 pies, which I usually do, that's then a whole can of evaporated milk, so you're not having half a can open. It's quite nice. So 3/4 cups evaporated milk. And again, printable recipes for the pie crust and the sweet potato pie will be in the description box below. Then we add 1 teaspoon vanilla extract. And then we have 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And if you like nutmeg, you can add 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg. My husband is actually not a fan of nutmeg. He doesn't like it in here, so I just omit it, and you can do that just fine. And then we're also going to add 1/2 cup of sugar. This is just cane sugar, and you see it all there, just kind of a dump. And now we're just going to go to a mixer and mix it all together. And this is why you do want a deeper bowl, because it's going to kind of go crazy. So let's go ahead and mix this up. Okay, so here we have it mixed, and I did forget that my sweet potatoes were actually cold. So you can see what it kind of did with the butter. If you can see that, it kind of looks like speckles in a way. So that's okay. I mean, like I said, it's gonna melt, and it's not like they're in massive chunks or anything. So that's why it kind of looks a little grainy, is because the sweet potatoes were cold. I completely forgot about that. But as you can see, we have it pureed. If everything is at room temperature or even warm, it's going to look more smooth than this. But we are now going to get our pie shell out, dump this in. Now, while we're doing this, you do need to preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'll give you instructions from there. So let's grab our pie crust. Okay, so now it's pretty easy peasy. This is the pie crust that we had in the fridge. I forgot to mention that it is good to let it be in the fridge for a little bit so it can rest. And now we just dump in our pie filling. And again, it usually does look smoother than this because I didn't have the sweet potatoes at room temperature. That's why the butter looks a little solidified, but it's not going to look like this when it comes out of the oven. Don't panic. All right, and we're going to make sure that it's kind of all even and looking good. And I'm so excited about this because it's just, my family loves this. They devour this sweet potato recipe, and actually was not a fan of sweet potato pie until I found this. So you're going to bake for 425 degrees for 15 minutes. And then after 15 minutes, you're going to turn down your oven to 350 degrees, leave everything in there, and then bake for another 35 to 40 minutes. I find the sweet spot for me is 35 minutes. And then you test it by putting a toothpick in the middle to make sure it comes out, nothing is there. And then once it's done, you're going to pull it out of the oven and you're going to let it rest on a cooling rack for about 10 minutes, or you can put it in the fridge. I do like to serve sweet potato warm, especially as like if it's going to be like a side dish to the meal, or cold. You can serve it cold with some Cool Whip, and that makes an excellent dessert. You can also serve it warm, however way you want it. It's really up to you. Comment below if you prefer your sweet potato pie cold or hot, and do you like it with Cool Whip? So let me know. So let's go ahead and put this in the oven, and I'll see you guys in a bit. All right, and here it is. It was done in 35 minutes for me, and now we need to let it rest. I recommend at least 15 to 20 minutes before slicing into it. All right, y'all, that is it. And it looks beautiful. And again, don't stress out if your pie crust may not look super pretty when rolling it out, because ultimately people want it to taste good, okay? And it still looks very delicious and very good. I hope this was very helpful for you. Gives you some ideas to use for Thanksgiving, and also just a general good run-of-the-mill pie crust, which is something that everyone needs. Again, this one makes 4 pie crust, so perfect for throwing some in the freezer for whenever you need it a bit quicker, because all you have to do is just leave it out for 25 minutes and you've got a pie crust that you can roll out, which is extremely handy. I think I have about 6 in my freezer right now because I've been experimenting. Let me know, as always, if you have any questions and what you plan on serving for Thanksgiving. I do plan on posting another video next week to continue on our Thanksgiving series. I hope this was helpful. Give it a thumbs up if it was, and I'll see you next week. Bye.